Morning, everyone. You all ready? I don't hear a no, so I'm going to go ahead and start. Pleased to be here at the Capitol with Governor Gavin Newsom. Once again, we're here because important matters impacting the people of the state of California, quite honestly, the American people, are occurring in Washington, D.C., and once again, California is being called upon to act. This morning, President Trump made a declaration that he had to use emergency powers in order to try to address a challenge at our border, and he called it a national emergency. President Trump got one thing right this morning about his declaration when he said, "I didn't have to do this." He's right. He didn't have to do this. In fact, he can't do this because the U.S. Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the powers to direct dollars, the power of the purse. The Constitution, Article 1, talks of the separation of powers between the executive and the legislative branch. Here's what Donald Trump also got wrong. No one in America is above the law, not even the President of the United States. The President does not have power to act frivolously, taking the powers of this 240-plus year democracy and using them in ways that were never intended. He has the power to declare a national emergency, but this is not 9/11. This is not the Iran hostage crisis of 1979. This is a president showing his disdain for the rule of law and our U.S. Constitution. For California, seeing this is nothing new. What's perhaps most ironic about this is that even the president knows that his declaration of an emergency for the nation is dubious. He himself said that this will be challenged in court. He already knows it. He himself said that he's probably going to lose in court. He already knows it. He himself said that this is going to be appealed, and he'll probably lose, and he already knows it. He himself said that he's hoping to get to the U.S. Supreme Court and then use the Supreme Court to try to win something that is nothing more than a campaign promise. He himself has said that he's going to try to use our United States Supreme Court, one of the most cherished institutions of this democracy, to fulfill a political promise. I believe President Trump is telegraphing that he knows that this declaration of national emergency is not a true national emergency, that he knows he will lose in court, and that he is hoping to use the U.S. Supreme Court as a tool in his game to fulfill a campaign promise. The consequences of that are harm to Californians, harm to all Americans, harm to our institutions working here in California to interdict drugs, harm to our men and women in uniform here in California and beyond, who will lose out on resources that are there for them and their families at our installations militarily throughout this country, and harm to the nation's rule of law and our U.S. Constitution. That's why today Governor Gavin Newsom and I are here, and we will be joined by several sister states to say to our people throughout this country that we will stand up for your rights. We will stand up for your rights as taxpayers, as men and women in uniform, and we will stand up for the rule of law, for the Constitution, and we will stand up for the institutions of this democracy, which have for more than 240 years worked the right way. President Trump got it right when he said he didn't have to do this. Mr. President, you shouldn't do this. Let me now yield to the Governor of the State of California, Gavin Newsom.
Thank you. And, I'm pleased by the comments of the Attorney General, and I'm grateful for his leadership and I'm certainly very supportive of our efforts to sue the administration and to see the president in court. Fortunately, Donald Trump is not the last word. The courts will be the last word. I was yesterday up in Butte County, Paradise. I was there with a lot of children that were displaced, not only from their homes, but their schools, their families literally torn asunder. Members of the family that are in different schools in different cities, some that are not even going to school, getting educated, still waiting for FEMA support, still waiting for disaster recovery money into their community. It's interesting that we are standing here today talking about an emergency when $12 billion was appropriated by the House of Representatives, and the Senate and the President are not moving that money to not only California for disaster relief, for real emergency, but nor are they allowing those dollars to go forward in Georgia and Texas and elsewhere. I just find that ironic and interesting. You have a real disaster that needs to be cleaned up, $12 billion sitting there, not even utterance, not even a reference in today's press conference of a real pressing need and a real human crisis that's manifesting in real time. And that's not an abstract thing. As I said, I witnessed it firsthand, not just the heroism of the first responders suppressing those fires, but in the aftermath, the struggle that persists in places like Butte County. What is remarkable about this is we also stood here a week ago and recognized that there was legitimacy to the concerns about drugs flowing through the border. We talked about the cartel activity a week ago that persists and is becoming more and more acute in parts of California. We talked about our desire to work with the President of the United States on drug interdiction, to partner with him to address the legitimate concerns around our ports of entry as it relates to fentanyl and methamphetamine and marijuana that's crossing the border, cocaine, et cetera. We talked about redeploying and partnering our redeployed members of the National Guard with the DEA and other federal agencies to promote more comprehensive interdiction. That is exactly the work that now is at risk because of this declaration of emergency. That irony is not lost or should not be lost on any Californian. No other state is going to be more impacted by this declaration of emergency than the state of California. And the irony of this is the actual work that was effective, the actual work that is responsible and responsive to the real legitimate concerns around fentanyl and methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine that is being done within the state of California is now being put at risk for a vanity project, for a monument to stupidity, a wall that will do nothing to impact drugs coming over our border. Ask any expert. Don't ask politicians. Certainly don't ask the President of the United States. Ask any expert how these drugs are getting across the border. If you think it's an image of an individual with 400 pounds of cocaine in their backpack, then you're delusional. The drugs are coming through the ports of entry through traditional means, vehicles, tractor trailers, coming over through drones, airplanes, coming all up and down the coast of California in boats. And the interdiction policies that we are engaged in, that we want to enhance in California, now are being put at risk because of this political crisis that is being manufactured to get the president out of the rut he clearly is in. Nancy Pelosi has run circles around the president of the United States, not once, now twice. He's been embarrassed, and his base needs to be fed. And as a consequence of that, he's impacting the lives of millions and millions of Californians and millions of Americans that demand and deserve better. Legitimate crisis with drugs in this nation can be addressed appropriately and thoughtfully. And we want to work collaboratively, and we want to work in the spirit of partnership. I don't want to be a sparring partner with President Trump. We want to be a working partner. But he makes it almost impossible when he plays these games and manufactures a crisis and creates the conditions where we have no other choice than to sue the administration, join other states, join our partners in the federal government to do the same, to go through the theater of, well, as I said a few weeks ago, the absurd, and to sort of create a sideshow to the real work that should be done in cooperation. if only we had a president that wanted to do the right thing. And so I just want to compliment our Attorney General for his ongoing vigilance, standing up on behalf of the people of the state of California. And I want to encourage other states, particularly those border state governors, to do the same. And as we said in our release, Donald Trump, we'll see you in court.
Just to be clear, the state of California is filing a lawsuit. Do you know how many? Are we the state filing it, and others are joining? And then do you know, has it been filed? And if not, when will it be filed?
We're reviewing the declaration, which I understand was just issued. We're going to take a close look at what the declaration actually says versus what the president says it says. And based on that, we'll take action. We're prepared to take any and all action, including go to court, to defend the interest of people of the state of California. We are working closely with several other states who feel the same way, that the interests of their people in their states will be impacted. And so once we've had a chance to review the declaration, we'll decide exactly how we proceed. But likelihood is that we will be filing an action very soon in court with other sister states partnering with the state of California.
How is this legal action going to be different than the one Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in Congress said they were going to take?
Obviously, this action would be based on the interests of the state of California, claiming that it's being harmed, and using every tool we can in court to try to prevent that kind of harm from occurring. If we're joined by sister states, they will make out the same kind of harm, and will proceed. My assumption is if the legislative branch, Democrats in the Congress, decide to take action, it will be likely based on their claim that the president is violating the Constitution's separation of powers, and so they would probably act under that allegation if they were to try to move forward. But again, you'll have to speak to the speaker on that.
In broad strokes, just to give you a sense of the magnitude, as I said, no other state is more impacted by this decision. Let me tell you why. We roughly, and this is a loose number, but when you consider federal appropriations, roughly 11% of federal appropriations, that's roughly the number we use in California in terms of the impact. 11% of all of the national appropriation will be impacted here in the state of California. So that puts the magnitude of the dollars at stake when you consider the totality, not just the 3.5, 3.6, the 2.5, and the 600 million. If you add all that together, California shares roughly in that 11%. It will impact our National Guard. It will impact military installations. We're going through, as the declaration will lay out a more detailed scope, we will architect in detail those things that will be impacted, we believe, directly by this emergency declaration. As a consequence, that's the harm that will be done to the people of the state of California, and that would obviously then be the predicate for the lawsuit itself. Know this, though, reason our Attorney General is, well, by any objective measure, one of the national leaders, not only in law enforcement, but is respected as such, is that he didn't wait for this. They anticipated this. When we found out, what was it, last summer, that the President of the United States was directing his budget director, Mulvaney, then at the time not chief of staff, to try to scrub to find dollars that they can reappropriate under this declaration, obviously they raised alarm bells and precipitated a lot of discussions here about how we could prepare to make sure California's interests are protected. That's why we are not reacting within minutes to this response. We had anticipated it, and now we're fleshing out the details based upon the actual declaration that's being advanced.
Sir, have you identified any?
Déjame, porque tenemos el gobernador responder a cualquier pregunta en español al fin.
Okay.
Governor, you said previously that you enjoy a, quote, tweet-by-tweet relationship with the president.
I think the American people do. I think I was speaking on behalf of hundreds of millions.
But you said you want to forge a better relationship with the federal government. What's the pathway to doing that from California's end?
Well, we said it yesterday. I was up there with first responders. I was there with Republican leaders in the Assembly and Senate and local leaders in Butte County, making the point that there's certain areas that have to be apolitical, that we have to rise above politics, and that is the area particularly of disasters, emergency preparedness, of taking care of the needs of American people, regardless of where they reside in Butte County, regardless of where they reside in the state of California. And so that's an area that we should always advance. As you may have seen, there was an article that appeared in the LA Times a week or so ago where the president acknowledged a phone call that I made to him around this as it relates to FEMA and as it relates to disaster preparedness, making that appeal directly to the President of the United States, saying, look, I don't want to be in this position, this adversarial position. The state of California wants to work with you. We appreciated you taking the time to come out and visit the folks, not only impacted in the Camp Fire, but the Woolsey Fire. I appreciated the time you took and the sincerity to which you expressed your concern about not only what happened, but your desire to make people whole. You said, we have your backs, and we're going to get this cleaned up. His words, we are going to get this cleaned up. I was standing quite literally, not figuratively, yesterday at the site of where he said that in Paradise. Nothing's changed. Now, that's our responsibility as much as it is his. But there's $12 billion of appropriation that the President of the United States didn't even pay lip service to. That's sitting there waiting to be appropriated, and there are millions of Americans right now waiting for those dollars, emergency money, to change their lives. These people are under enormous stress and anxiety. Can you imagine being a 7 or 8 year old kid whose brother is in one school, cousins are in another school? They lost everything. And they're not even in a school that they've recognized because it's a makeshift auditorium. And they're waiting for their semblance of hope, something to sort of normalize things. And yet we're still playing politics with that $12 billion appropriation, and we're getting in this sideshow around a wall that will impact none of the issues that he asserted it would impact. In fact, it will make things worse. Fentanyl will become more prominent in America because of this declaration. Cocaine and methamphetamine will become more of a problem in the United States of America and the state of California with this declaration. He is arguing to make the drug problem in America worse by this action, not better. And that's why it is right and fitting and appropriate for this state to file this lawsuit. And it's right that other states join. And it's right that the federal government and its more enlightened leaders, Democrats and Republicans, join in those efforts.
Governor, President Trump has characterized the illegal immigration problem at the border as an emergency, a national emergency. So if you don't agree with that, how would you characterize the situation?
Well, let's just deal with facts. Forgive me. They're stubborn, and I recognize the president wasn't interested in even responding to them today in a number of questions he was asked in his press conference. But border crossings through 2017, up until last year, were the lowest they've been since 1971. Illegal immigrants in this state and across the country commit crimes at a lower rate than native-born citizens. California, based on Pew, did an analysis. Over the last decade, we have 550,000 less people without documentation in this state than we did a decade ago. The whole thing is manufactured. The whole thing is made up. The whole thing is political theater. It's the circus. And we're all playing it. And part of us were like, should we participate in this? Well, we have no choice because we have to have the back of the people we represent. And I'm very proud we have the leadership we do.
I'm going to just add one set of words on that point that the governor made very well. And these are words, not mine. These are words of the president's own Department of Homeland Security when they said the southwest land border is more difficult to illegally cross today than ever before.
Since there are a lot of potential plaintiffs, people who are eager to go to court to overturn this, what are the chances that your office, the lead plaintiff in any lawsuit? And also, how would you respond to the president's comments today that they're going to take this to Ninth Circuit and it's going to go to the Supreme Court anyway?
Well, certainly we're going to be standing with a lot of other state attorneys general, with other leaders throughout the country who just don't believe that we should be exploiting the rule of law the way President Trump has. That we want to respect the Constitution's edicts on how to go about using taxpayer money. And I don't think there'll be a shortage of people who want to take the president to court on that. And we will be, along with several other state AGs, leading an effort on behalf of our states. In terms of, what was the second part about?
The president saying this is going to go to the Ninth Circuit, so it'll just go to the U.S. Supreme Court
As I
anyway.
said, the president illustrates his disdain for the courts, which I think is so damaging, and to the point where he thinks he can tinker with the Supreme Court. Forget about the trial courts, forget about the mid-level appellate courts like the Ninth Circuit. He thinks because it's a conservative Supreme Court, he can use that Supreme Court to get his will done. And it's unfortunate because everyone, whether you're conservative or liberal, from the north or south, makes no difference. We all have to rely on the Supreme Court being a body that will rule for the people of this country, not for this president.
Governor, is this emergency declaration going to impact funds for cleaning up Paradise, or is that a separate?
That's a separate issue.
Okay.
But to me, it's not, because it goes deep into the zeitgeist of this moment. There is an emergency. It's real. And I experienced that in a very emotional and very direct way yesterday, meeting with those victims that are still waiting for support, still waiting for relief. And that relief has not been forthcoming. There's a $12 billion appropriation the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed that the Senate and the President of the United States have held up, and they didn't even acknowledge that today. And there are millions of Americans waiting for that emergency relief. That is a real crisis, not a manufactured crisis. And that is something that the President himself needs to square.
Have you identified any specific funding that the state is set to lose
Yeah,
under
we're
this
analyzing all of that, and the Attorney General and I were talking as we walked in. The declaration, quite literally, was just submitted, so it's being reviewed. So we'll be able to answer that in more detail and nuance in the next few hours. We are assessing all of our partnerships with the DOJ, all our drug interdiction efforts, not only the border, but substantively the work we've been doing in inland parts of the state, which will be, we believe, impacted by this. We're looking at the military installations in the state of California. Again, no other state will be more harmed than the state of California because of the magnitude of the money. We're also looking at potentially the impact of our National Guard deployment, including that deployment that I announced, the redeployment just a week ago, to acknowledge the legitimate concerns around ports of entry and the issue of drugs, and trying to help aid the administration in those legitimate efforts, of which this emergency declaration will set us back, not allow us to move forward.
But these are, I'm sorry, these are federal, cooperative
Correct.
operations with the DOJ, or are
All of
they
the above.
federal agency in
You got it.
California?
So
doing-
local law enforcement, state law enforcement, existing task forces, all of those potentially at risk of losing money, or more importantly, momentum. I know the president tries to downplay that this is somehow sequential. It substantively impacts our planning. These takes years and years to build these operations. The planning now is disrupted by definition. This has put a chill in law enforcement. The irony of that's not lost on me either. As the president tries to appeal his fealty towards law enforcement, yeah, he's just taken the rug out from local law enforcement and hurt them for a vanity project on the border.
By declaring an emergency, though, does the president have any, does he gain any power over, like, the National Guard, like where they're deployed?
Not
or anything like
directly,
that?
but he potentially impacts the funding for those deployments. But he has not co-opted our rights and authority of the National Guard, but he does indirectly impact those operations. As you know from the announcement last week, it was our intention to work with the administration to seek funding to redeploy a percentage of the National Guard that are currently on the border. Of those 360, we wanted to pull over 100 to focus on drug interdiction and the cartel activity in Northern California. We met with someone the other day that talked about almost the terrorist type of activity that's going on currently with the cartels in the Emerald Triangle, where they're literally threatening locals that they will kill their families unless they look out for local law enforcement and tip them off around illegal cannabis grows. It's not only an environmental hazard, but literally people's lives are at risk. Those kinds of operations to address those legitimate concerns today are at risk because of the president's pronouncement.
So just to be clear, I know you're still figuring out exactly what the lawsuit might look like, but you've argued that, the president is overstepping his bounds in declaring this, and also that he's going to be misappropriating money. Do you expect the lawsuit will focus on one of those things, both of those things, and how soon do you think we might be ready to file?
We'll be ready soon. We just have to read the declaration. We have to find out how far it goes in trying to usurp powers that only can be done through a legitimate declaration of a national emergency. But we will use every argument that's put before us through this frivolous declaration to ensure that we protect not just the people, but the laws, the people of the state and the country, but the laws of this country as well. The president's overreach has been extensive on any number of occasions, and we've shot them down in court on any number of occasions because they have gone beyond what the law permits the executive to do. This is another example of how the president is exploiting a serious law, which has been used in the past, as I mentioned, 9/11, Iran hostage crisis. There are other examples, but serious examples of where it's important for the president to be able to move in ways that might not be possible without the declaration. As the president said himself, he didn't have to do this. There's no emergency here for the nation. He's just using this as his cover to try to move this further. And at the end, he also made it very clear. He's depending on what he hopes is a conservative Supreme Court that will back his political play to be able to do this. But I think his advisors, I think Republicans in Congress have said to him, this is treacherous territory you're now taking us on. And I hope that smarter heads prevail in Congress bipartisanly so that we stop the president from undermining more than 240 years of a democracy that most around the world try to emulate.
As just a point of context, you mentioned that there's been extensive overreach on any number of occasions. Can you give people some context as to how many pending lawsuits California has and what have been the major victories and losses in the courtroom so far?
Take for example, today the Supreme Court agreed to take on a case on the U.S. Census. The Census Bureau under Trump, President Trump, chose to add a question to the census questionnaire that would undermine a thorough, legitimate counting of the people who live in the United States, which would impact, as Governor Newsom has said so very well, the state of California more than anyone else if there's an undercount, because we're the largest state, and with the largest state with the largest number of people who likely would be undercounted. There was a ruling by the courts that the Trump administration overreached and violated the law. That is now going to be heard by the Supreme Court. On any number of cases, we proved that the Trump administration overreached when it tried to undo environmental protections, health care protections for our people when it comes to the safety and need to restrict the polluting of our communities. We have taken this administration to court for trying to stop us from doing law enforcement the way we think best for the people of the state, which the 10th Amendment allows states to decide. And we have beaten the administration in its overreach in trying to restrict how our local law enforcement authorities conduct public safety. I could go on and on. This will be the 46th lawsuit, but most of them have to do with Trump administration overreach, and in most cases, we have proven to be correct.
And how would you characterize the success rate?
If I were a baseball player, our batting average would be phenomenal. It'd be out of this world.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I'd be a free agent making some good money.
Mr. Attorney General, on the issue of police records, which has become a big issue for you this week.
Now, let me answer the question on police records. But before we go there, if we're going to go off the subject, let me just in Spanish say a couple of words on this, and then we'll get to the police records. Hoy lo que estamos anunciando el gobernador Gavin Newsom y yo es que después de escuchar las palabras del presidente Donald Trump de que hay una emergencia nacional en la frontera, estamos aquí para declarar en contra de la declaración del presidente Trump, que eso es falso, y no solo es falso, es inmoral y es ilegal. Y estamos listos de defender los intereses del pueblo de California, de los que pagan los impuestos en California y de los que viven aquí y pagan impuestos en toda la nación, de proteger esos intereses y los derechos que tenemos, de estar asegurados que el dinero que mandamos a Washington, D.C., se va a usar por lo que el Congreso ha dicho que se puede usar, no por lo que un presidente, violando la Constitución, quiere usarlo para hacer. Esto de construir un muro en la frontera no tiene el apoyo del Congreso, no tiene el apoyo del pueblo norteamericano y no tiene el apoyo bajo la ley. Y por eso el gobernador Gavin Newsom y yo estamos listos este día de decir que en cualquier manera necesaria estaremos opuestos a esta propuesta en las Cortes, en el pueblo y ojalá también en el Congreso vemos la oposición a esta falsa declaración de una emergencia nacional declarada hoy por el presidente de los Estados Unidos.
Parece que las expectativas son difíciles considerar hacer esta batalla.
Mira, hasta el presidente Trump anunció que él cree que va a perder en las Cortes en esta batalla legal, que su declaración no va a sobrevivir un reto en la Corte. Él dice que también cree que va a perder una apelación de este caso en las Cortes. Y lo que espera es utilizar la Corte Suprema, no como Corte que determina en una manera balanceada, pero que él espera determine en una manera política lo que puede suceder y lo que puede ser el presidente de los Estados Unidos. Ojalá tenemos nuestras instituciones trabajando en una manera recta para por fin poner en alto esta clase de violación de las leyes por la persona con el más poder en el mundo, el presidente de los Estados Unidos.
Esa declaración de emergencia, ¿cuán grave sería para el estado de California? ¿Qué áreas se verían más afectadas?
La declaración, como lo ha dicho el gobernador Newsom, afecta a California más que a cualquier otro estado y el pueblo californiano más que a cualquier otro pueblo, porque somos el pueblo más grande, somos el pueblo con más inmigrantes y somos el pueblo que más que cualquier otro brinda recursos al gobierno nacional en cuanto al asunto militar. Así que en todos sentidos California puede perder mucho si no nos ponemos frente de esta acción ilegal del presidente Trump, y por eso estamos aquí parados este día para anunciar que estamos listos de defender el pueblo californiano contra el presidente Trump otra vez. Let me go. Any other further questions on this subject?
Yeah, I mean, so you're not really prepared to say anything more about what specific venue you might use for this lawsuit or the particular arguments that would come up. I know the Youngstown Supreme Court case from 1952 has been widely discussed.
Yes, as I said, we're going to look over the declaration to see exactly where it tries to take this country, and then we'll go from there. But I think it's pretty clear when the president himself says that this is not a real national emergency, that he didn't have to do this. He's our best witness in why he is acting outside the bounds of the law. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Let me. I did promise I would answer.
Yeah.
Forgive me, Governor. I just want to. Yes.
Yeah,
The question.
so, I mean, what do you say to progressives in your own party who could see your actions this week and in refusing to release those records to, you know, you're blocking efforts by the California legislature and the previous governor to hold bad cops accountable?
So I'm simply trying to abide by some rulings by the courts. I am not trying to block anything. I will do what the courts say I can legally do. And I have said that from the very beginning, that it's my job to make sure that we're abiding by the law. There is some uncertainty about what the law actually says. There are courts that are trying to give us some clarity, and once there's clarity, I'm prepared to act. But remember, when you're talking about a person's private information, to disclose it and be told by a court that that was the wrong thing to do, I can't provide that privacy thereafter. You get one chance to get it right, not two. I'd rather make sure I do this right because there are lots of people whose privacy is at stake. That's the only thing I'm saying. Once there's clarity, I'm prepared to move.
The author of the bill has said unequivocally that the records do apply to the records before January 1st of this year. So why do you believe that that's not, why that issue is in question?
There are courts who have said that that information, private information, should not be disclosed until there's a full hearing on the merits of the cases that are before that court. if you're asking me to fly in the face of what those courts have so far ruled, then what you're saying to me is that the Attorney General doesn't have to follow some of the rules that are now before us. I intend to try to give the people of California the best representation of what the laws say. I'm not saying that the new law 1421 does not require the disclosure of documents before January 1st, 2019. I'm saying there is uncertainty on whether it does, and we need to make sure there's clarity. My decision is not the final word on that clarity. Neither is any legislator's word. The final word comes from our courts. If I just said to you that I'm preparing to sue Donald Trump because he has overreached, it's because he's not following the rules. Please don't ask me now to do exactly what Donald Trump does in not following the rules.
So of the law enforcement agencies that have released their records, are they in violation?
You have to speak to them. They made a determination. As I said, before I disclose any Californian's private information, I'm going to make sure I'm doing the right thing. Thanks all very much.